Question number 8, Chris Hipkins.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education. Does she stand by her commitment that if partnership schools don't succeed, the government will be just as quick to close them down as we have been to establish them, end quote? If so, how much taxpayer money is expected to be spent on Whangaruru Charter School between the 28th of May 2015, the date the Ministry recommended the termination of its contract, and the 1st of January 2016?
The Honourable Hikia Parata, and my office has been advised this answer may be slightly longer than normal. Honourable Hikia Parata.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes. The decision to allow Te Pū Manawa o Te Wairua to continue operating was made in the best interests of the kids. These are not just any kids. These are some of the most vulnerable kids in our country who face a bleak future if they are unable to gain educational qualifications. I want to give them every chance possible to do that. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education did not recommend termination of the school's contract, but it did advise me following the specialist audit that the grounds for termination existed should I choose to do so. As I have already stated, to terminate in the middle of the school year would not be in the best interests of these kids. Mr. Speaker, Te Pū Manawa o Te Wairua will continue to operate under its contract and will therefore receive $412,000 per quarter. This is the money that would have been spent had these kids attended other schools. In addition, the kura may receive up to $129,000 following discussions with the Ministry of Education that will allow for implementation of its remedial plan and to fund external expertise. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the board of the school is very aware that I have reserved the right to terminate the agreement before the end of the year if I am not satisfied students are receiving the standard of education they deserve and need.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Did she receive and read the report from the Ministry of Education dated the 28th of May 2015 that states, quote, "We recommend that the Minister of Education agree to issue under clause 25 of the agreement the sponsor with the attached notice proposing termination of its partnership school agreement." If so, how does she reconcile that with the comment that she just made saying that she never received a recommendation to close the school?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr. Speaker, I did read that report, and the reason the member has it is because I made it publicly available. At the time that the Ministry was writing that report on the 28th of May, the Ministry was concerned that those who were in charge of the school were resistant to the kinds of changes that were needed to ensure that these kids were given a better education. Since then, the board chair has been changed. Since then, they have accepted an appointing of a trustee with an education focus. Since then, there is an appointee who will deal with the business side of things. Since then, there is a new educational leader. Am I prepared to go further for these 39 kids in the hope that they might get a better education? Yes.
So she did get a recommendation.
Order.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question. Supplementary question.
Supplementary.
Chris Hipkins.
Did she receive advice from the Ministry of Education, quote, "The Ministry considers that the performance failures are not capable of remedy," end quote? If so, what evidence did she rely upon when she made the decision to ignore that advice and keep the school open?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr. Speaker, yes, and the answer, the very full one I just gave to the first supplementary, explains why I chose to take a different course of action. Because at the time that advice was proffered, it was clear that the governance and management of the school were not delivering what was required for the kids. Now I am satisfied that with the new governance and the new education leadership, we will have more optimism that these young people will get educational qualifications. And your colleagues crowing beside you that have seen Pacifica education go up under this government, because we have gone the extra leg, should be applauding that rather than crowing over there.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
If the well-being of the students in question are indeed the Minister's primary concern, did she read and receive and read the advice from the Ministry of Education, quote, the Ministry already has measures in place to transition students attending the school to other schools? If so, why is she saying she needed to keep the school open in order to give those kids an education?
The Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr. Speaker, yes. I both received and read, considered and deliberated, discussed the report of the 28th of May, and I made the decision I made based on the answers I've already given in the previous two supplementaries.
Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Why should the public of New Zealand have any more confidence in her decision to ignore the advice from the Ministry of Education to close the school than they did in her decision to ignore the Ministry of Education's advice not to open the school in the first place, given the litany of failure that has followed?
The Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr. Speaker, I completely understand that the member cannot differentiate between advice given in one set of circumstances and advice given in another set of circumstances. But I think the public should have confidence that this government has been prepared to go the extra mile for kids that are the most vulnerable. This has been demonstrated not just in the education sector, but across our whole social sector approach. We are prepared to make bigger efforts because we want these most vulnerable kids to get the best chance possible.
Question.
Supplementary question, Chris Hipkins.
Can she now guarantee that every taxpayer dollar the school has received, as well as the $1 million more that they are expected to receive for the remainder of this year, will be spent appropriately and for the benefit of students' education?
The Honourable Hiki Parata.
Mr. Speaker, as with the other $10.8 billion in vote education that is entrusted to boards of trustees across the country, I can't make guarantees of that nature, but I am confident that every school sets out to do the best that it possibly can, and I expect that of this school, and we will be monitoring it. And we will be monitoring. What a sad sack those members are.
Question number 9, Todd Muller.